Welcome to Launch Codes, the podcast about marketing operations, artificial intelligence, and more. Each week, you'll hear from experts as they share insights, stories, and strategies. Welcome to episode 9. I'm your host, Joe Peters. On today's episode, Top of the Ops, highlights from MOPs-Apalooza 2023, a cornucopia of treats from AI this week, and I'm joined live on location here at MOPs-Apalooza in Anaheim, California with Andy. And Andy, what are you excited to talk about this week?
All of it, but especially MOPs-Apalooza. Just what an amazing event. Absolutely just top notch.
Yeah, I think it exceeded all of our expectations. Hats off to all of the team, Mike Rizzo and the gang. They've just really outdone themselves for a first conference. It was professional and engaging from minute one.
Yes, absolutely. Every session I went to, there was a winner. There was at least several takeaways that I was actually taking notes on. It wasn't just like, oh, this is interesting, but not actionable. So many actionable things.
Yeah.
Incredible.
And just from the opening keynote with Scott Brinker, that was incredible. There were aha moments. It seemed like every couple of minutes that he'd run through something and just trigger a light bulb, and you'd be, oh, I hadn't really thought about it that way. Oh, that's a really good way of categorizing things. So I really loved when he talked about this innovation timeline and moving from code to low code to no code.
Yes.
And how it's kind of like the democratization of, I'm going to say, marketing from a technology base, but really empowering marketers to do a lot more than they ever could.
Absolutely. And to be thinking about new ways of doing things and access to things that they before would have looked at and went, I wouldn't even know where to start, right? It gives them a starting point that they otherwise wouldn't have even thought possible, which is, it's incredible. Yeah. It's very cool.
And so where he made this connection to, as you know, we love here on Launch Codes, the connection to this coding, low code, no code evolution, and how it connects to AI and use cases. So the idea of that low end use case, that mid range use case, that high end use case that is going to have significant impact in your organization, and how no code and AI is driving this transformation with the organizations, driving this disruption. He said, I don't like saying transformation. We can go with disruption. We're good with that one. But I love that framing and integration of those two concepts.
Well, and the fact that he'd already passed, right, like the first stage and was already heading into that mid-range, right? Like he had blown past low. Like that's already happening. We're in trajectory for mid already, and it's happening just so fast. It's really, which is true, but I hadn't paused to think about it and go, yeah, that already happened. Like that's already the past. He was phenomenal. And I somehow, this is bad to say, but I somehow missed that he was going to be our first keynote. And so when they said that's who was coming on stage, I was like, oh, yes. So excited. He was a phenomenal speaker to see. He simplified such complexity down into digestible pieces that allowed you to really take something and consider it without feeling overwhelmed by it.
Yeah. There were so many takeaways from that. And I'm still waiting to get access to his deck. He said he was going to share it, but we haven't seen it yet. There's just a treasure trove of information and insights there.
Absolutely.
Well, speaking of treasure trove, and let's segue right into your session where you kind of looked at the meaning of life, the universe, and attribution. And there's so many different layers we can start with here. But
just a small thing.
Why don't we start with this is your labor of love passion project with some, the Hitchhiker's Guide, which is your arguably your most favorite novel.
Yeah.
Tell everyone a little bit about what your mindset was in thinking about this, and then I can tell you how it came off, but why don't you talk about your process there?
Yes. So I read Hitchhiker's Guide and the concurrent novels over 20 years ago, immediately fell in love. It was just a love affair of the merging of comedy and sci-fi, but with this level of insight into the world, humanity, how we're wired, and a nuanced way of making fun of it and critiquing it and kind of pointing things out without just overtly saying, here's the flawed aspects of humanity or just consciousness as a whole. And also, here's a fun ride to take along with all of that as you hitchhike across the galaxy and have just this like sort of stupid, like, in what galaxy is a towel the most useful thing, right? But it is. So it's a fun thing. So about a year ago, I was thinking about the sort of parable within the novels of this pan-dimensional super race of beings that decided that they wanted to, or maybe even needed to know the answer to the ultimate question of the meaning of life, universe, and everything. Huge question, right? And so they built a supercomputer, deep thought, to tell them the answer. And they waited generations, tens of thousands of years, and the culture was just focused and centric around the output that they would eventually get from deep thought and how that would bring everything together. And their whole culture was almost like dependent on whatever this answer would be. It's a media frenzy around it. And then the day comes and out, pops the answer. Deep thought's like, the answer to the ultimate question of the meaning of life, the universe, and everything is 42.
Exactly.
And pin drop, right? Like, what do you do with that, right? It's such a nonsensical answer. And so, of course, they do what any overly intelligent organization, race would do, culture, planet. And they say, okay, well, what's that mean? The computer says, well, only when you know the question will the answer make sense, right? So at that point, they're invested. They say, what's the question? And the computer says, I can't tell you that, but I can help you to develop this bigger, more complex, intensely complex computer that will give you the answer or the question rather, and then the answer will make sense. And the parable of this against people within their own organizations building these very complex systems or adopting these very complex AI models and looking for the answer of where they should be investing and how they can make more money, how they can drive revenue, the dependency on that, and waiting for the results rather than continuing to evolve and take action and looking for meaning within the minutia of the day-to-day, and then getting an answer that makes no sense. They double, triple, quadruple down and make an even more complex system to then get, the question that they should be asking around the answer that they received because it didn't make any sense. To me, just was too on the nose for the attribution journey that I've seen so many organizations take. It was too perfect.
100%. And what I thought was so cool was the idea of using 42 as that placeholder, and that answer 42 has meaning for everyone, and everyone gets to figure out what their 42 is.
Well, that was the linchpin for me when I knew I needed to take this into this from a presentation. So I came across the fact, and Douglas Adams claims that this was not intentional. I don't know. Maybe it's subconscious. Maybe it was intentional. I just didn't want to say so. But he was a technophile. He loved computers. He loved computer language. Early language that he was a big fan of, ASC2, 42 is the keystroke for an asterisk. And when you think about in the context of data, the asterisk is a placeholder. It's something, to your point, that you put in place when you don't know something, there's something there. But I love this idea of 42 in that computer deep thoughts language is an asterisk. And an asterisk essentially means whatever you need it to mean. And so this huge question had an answer that was exceptionally deep, actually. That could have fed their media circus for generations, right? What is the meaning of everything? Whatever you need it to mean for you, there's something there,
Full message.
right? But in the same way that 42 meant nothing to them, the data that marketers are getting from attribution doesn't mean anything to them because A, the questions are too big and they're trying to get too much out of one question and one answer. But also B, they're not speaking the language of their systems, their data, to actually understand that there is a deeper meaning in there. They just aren't either speaking their computer's language or getting the computer to be able to speak their language to output what that action or that meaning is or should be.
It was, I can tell it was extremely well received. Not only was I in the room, but I could observe. And what I find when you're going to different sessions, a sign of good session is how often people are bringing up their phones.
Yes.
Oh, I got to capture that. I got to capture that. He was a celebrity with all the shots that were taken of her. But I think the other part, and I don't know if this is fair for me to ask, but there's another 42 story that we added in terms of some ink being added this week. So why don't you share that story with everyone?
Yes. So I found out in advance of coming that there were going to be tattoos happening on
real tattoos, not temporary.
Yeah, forever tattoos. And in preparing for my session, I had this sort of recurrence of 42. It just was this bizarre thing. Like I actually took my progression and put it into ChatGPT to make sure my timing was on point, right? And I judged and I was pulling it back and saying, okay, well, if I take this on in these slides, how do I get within the range of that, 40 to 45 minute slot that I needed to hit? And the final pass, because I after that, I was like, I'm done. I can't do anymore. It came back and it said, your session will take 42 minutes and 42 seconds. And I literally cackled out loud. I was like, I see you, Douglas Adams, right? Like, yeah. So I have never gotten a tattoo before. I was a noob. And I thought about it long and hard, but in college, everyone was getting them, right? Yeah. And I always looked at it and said, I don't know, I want anything on my body until I'm 80. But the reality is, I mean, God willing, I make it to 80, but I think that the convergence of the people, the significance of what happened here, and being able to bring the session that I've literally been developing for a year to this particular conference at this time was something that I do want to remember until I'm 80. And so I got a 42 in my soul.
Goosebumps there. I just got goosebumps because not only do you have that memory, but it's also you've created a gift for everyone as well, and that you've taken this guide, and now there is a little ebook on this that is available, so that if you're getting FOMO from this discussion on the session, there is the ability for you to download and check out what Andy's been sharing in terms of connecting your guide to the galaxy, and attribution is now at your fingertips. But Andy, congrats on a great session. But let's get to a couple other ones that we really enjoyed. The first one, there was some non-technical streams that I thought were really cool. And by non-technical, wasn't getting into the nuts and bolts or deep into the technologies, but we're talking about life and how do you be successful in your MOPS career. And Jessica Cow and what was the other guy's name?
David Alexander.
They did a session on how to speak the language of your CMO. That might not be the exact title of it, but just work with us here.
Yes.
And I loved the way they started the session. And David had some really incredible points. He said, I never want to hear the name, as a CMO, I never want to hear the name of a platform. Don't tell me a platform. I don't want to know that this is a Marketo thing or a lean data thing or a Clearbit thing. I want to know what it does. So talk to me, just change your mindset a little bit. And I don't want to hear you mention a platform. Just tell me about what this system does or what this system's role is. And I felt like that was, I think for people in the room, you could see people's brains exploding at that idea because we're so close to it. We live and breathe this, but it's our language, not the language of leadership.
But I think as very technical people, right, we figure something out, we crack something and we get really excited about it. We want to go share that. But ultimately what we're not doing, instead of saying like, oh, there's this really cool thing I made the system do, it's I did this cool thing in the system. That's great. But here's the outcome that will be driven because of it. And that's what ladders up into senior leadership. What are the outcomes that are occurring within the business? Or what if you stopped that now, has improved things that will then yield outcomes, right? That flipping the script to talking about not what matters to you, but what matters to them.
And I thought the other part, if we take the sort of next step in that, was don't tell me when something's broken or what you can't do, okay? Tell me what you can deliver and what you're moving towards. But this idea that, we all live in this world where we want perfection in MOPS, and some of that is going to be like Maslow's hierarchy. We may never reach self-actualization when it comes to getting everything working perfectly. So we can always get mired in this is broken, I can't do this, look what I inherited. No. That's another change in mindset to start to think through this. I can do this right now, and I want to be able to do this next.
Yeah.
Beautiful language. I love language.
Yes. I will fund you improving efficiency from 75 to 85, but I will not fund something where it's broken and I want to fix it, right? It's the gain, not the current status.
So great session. A reminder for all of us, and I really feel it was an eye-opener for those people in the room. It's a session that a lot of people have continued to talk about, and that was on Monday.
Yes.
For those of you at home, it's Wednesday today. So just it's a theme that I think really resonated with a lot of people. And then this next session that Hana Jacover, or I think that's how you pronounce her last name, on self-care and the idea of how do you optimize yourself and how do you take care of yourself in our demanding work life. So what's that balance that you need to create, and what does that look like? And I was just blown away at having the chance to chat with her after the session and hear about her approach and the, I don't know, there was like light bulb going off the whole time.
Yes. I mean, I think having an opportunity in the middle of pursuing growth, right? That's what most of us are here for at this type of a conference, to realize that, it's not the technical growth, right? It's getting yourself unstuck from other areas that then allow you to have the baseline to then have the capacity to grow more in the technical and other areas of your career, right? Personal growth leads to career growth. And I think the connection between those two things is just so powerful.
Yeah. And what I took away from my in chatting with her was we often don't think about how do we perform our best at a biological level.
Yes.
We're not equipped to do 3 90-minute Zooms back to back to back. We're not equipped for that. We're never going to perform our best in those situations. So that self-awareness, that reflection on what we set ourselves up to, what do we put our hands up for? Oh, I can't miss that. I can't miss that. And also, how do we reset? These are very powerful things for people to think about, to complement your technological skills with that self-awareness, self-care, to speak the language of CMOs and leadership. These are some really beautiful connections being made between what is essential to be successful in our work life.
Yes, and I think it just shows how much we've come in the sense that these are the conversations that we're having. It's not just a way to do really cool stuff, right? It's how to get yourself to a place where you can do really cool stuff. And that's such a wonderful evolution to see for such a technical community, that those are the conversations that we're having, that people are continuing to talk about. These 2 sessions were 2 of the most talked about sessions that I encountered across the entirety of this whole conference, because they stepped back. I mean, I love all the conversations around AI, APIs, right? All these cool things that people are doing. But at the end of the day, you can't do any of that if you're not doing this.
Exactly. And well, it is also eye-opening for us to make sure we're not forgetting all those different pieces. as leaders in our organization, really making sure that we're helping equip people in all of these different areas to be successful.
So true.
But now to nerd back, like just to get back into it, we just finished seeing this morning. The last session for us was one that Ryan Vong put on, and Ryan is an extremely thoughtful and passionate person. He was a little nervous going into his session, but he hit a home run, maybe multiple home runs. It was excellent. And he went on this journey. In Canada, we'll often say he went for a walk in the snow to kind of figure out what he was doing next. And then he came across this challenge of data and what's happening with data and what are we doing with it? How are we optimizing it? How are we making it sure that it's a partner in our business and an accelerator in our business and not an anchor that we're dragging along on the ground? And there was a couple of things that really struck with me. You know, he had this idea of the cost of bad data. It's $1 to be preemptive, $10 to fix it, and it's $100 if you don't do anything with it for every data problem that you have. And so when you add that up exponentially, that looks those can be some really big numbers. But this other idea that we need to expand our thinking into a new model of a modern data approach where we've thought of RevOps, we've thought of marketing ops, but now we need to be pushing for data ops. And that is a real role where MOPs can play a leadership in the connectivity between, whether that's sales, marketing, IT. This is a journey that cannot be executed by a single part of the organization, but it can be led. And I think this is a really great place for MOPs to maybe put another hat on, or at least another pin on it, on our hats.
Yes, but I think it's interesting too. I've had a number of great conversations with some very smart people this week, and the persistent theme, which Ryan really, I think, hit home, was, I remember one of my very first titles before MOPs was even a title was database marketing. Right?
Yeah.
And we're in that final stage of transitioning from being responsible for databases to becoming responsible for data, right? And how that transition from database within a specific system into data within the ecosystem and all the systems as a whole is a paradigm shift that we have to make now. And then the orchestration of that and how Ryan's thinking about that is the part that I am most in love with.
This concept of composability is something that's come up in a lot of
such a through line. Yeah.
And I really do think that, whether we're talking about ETLs, reverse ETLs, and this idea of interconnectivity, what has been our aspirational place to be, we have the pieces in place to make it a reality. And it's going to take some time and investment, but that's where the dividends are coming from, and not the losses. And that's, I think that understanding that tension and understanding that opportunity is super important. Okay, well, as you can tell, we're big fans of MOPs-Apalooza. There was no shortage of fun, but before we move on to some of our hot takes, I'd like to thank our sponsors at Knack for helping us out with today's episode. Knack is the no-code platform that allows you to build campaigns in minutes. Learn why tens of thousands of marketers rely on Knack to create beautiful on-brand emails and landing pages. Visit knack.com to learn more. That's KNAK.com. So, like every week, this is another mammoth week in AI developments. So I'm not sure the coincidence, it definitely is an irony, but I'm going to say the coincidence of Grok being released by Elon and the gang at X.AI on Sunday, and the idea that Grok was going to take a theme of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy as kind of the style and the humanization. It was. Can we have any more symbolism?
There's a synchronicity to it, right? Like there is that bit of,
It's not a coincidence. This is beyond.
No.
This is the universe saying, hey, there's too many things to check here. So it's early days on Grok. Like no one can get really access to it now. It's going to be a while before we get to play around with it. But I think what I've taken away from the things that I've seen so far is it's the Twitter idea of freedom of speech being taken to AI. And so the guardrails that the gang at OpenAI has put on GPT and making sure that you can't, generate offensive content or that there isn't a bias or any of those things is kind of out the window. What I'm seeing a lot of people start to play around with is roast this person viciously, say this in a vulgar way, and the AI responding with it without those guardrails. So I don't know, are these screenshots that people are manipulating? We're not going to be able to know for sure, but I think it's a whole new era where we're taking this free speech concept. If these things that people are sharing are true, we're in for something. And I don't think we can really predict how much of an impact this kind of open free speech can have. I'm going to say the negative sides of this, and we like to talk about the positives
always, but
the negatives on this, it has me a tiny bit concerned.
Agreed. I don't know. This is one of those things where there isn't a good gray area, right? Like either it is open or it's closed, right? That is the dichotomy that we have to live within here. And so I think we have to try both ways and see how it works and then make a decision. It's going to be not great. I think there's going to be some really negative things that come out of it, some scary stuff, some things that maybe turn people off and people, scale back from it a little bit, maybe take a step back and really think. But I'd rather have us taking a step back and thinking about it now and then moving forward in a very, thoughtful way than having this, scale out later. But it's
going to be interesting. And, I love Twitter and LinkedIn for business. I feel like are so important sources of information. I love my feeds. I love what I get. But LinkedIn is a very positive environment.
Yes.
Okay. Twitter, it can be a cesspool of negativity. And so it's going to be interesting as we move out of this, I'm going to say, boundaries set to this unshackling of the. It's going to be interesting. Interesting is not strong enough, but anyway, we'll Elon. He knows. He definitely is an interesting character, and we shouldn't be surprised that this is his take on it.
No, not at all. In fact, if anything, it was almost too on brand.
Too much for us. Well, he is too much for many people, but he is a very successful entrepreneur. So we can't take that away from him. So let's switch to the OpenAI announcements. And this, we could do the whole Launch Codes episode on what happened this week with the developer
100%.
Conference and some of the things that have come out. And I've been refreshing my GPT interface to see if I got the new features enabled, because I can't wait to play with this. But the one that I am just fascinated with is the idea of creating your own GPT. So you're going to have your own agents. So you get to upload some content, set some parameters around how that GPT is going to behave, how you get to name it, you get to give it an image or a brand associated with it. And then that you get to save and share that. You can either use it for personal use, or you can use it, you can share it with the world. People will be able to sell these eventually as well. So these are enterprise, which is really where we're emphasizing. Enterprises will be able to create their own GPTs internally and be able to share them only internally. And that's going to be a beautiful thing as well. So I don't know, that there are a million other announcements this week in terms of things that are going to be improvement, but this is the one that I can't wait to see what we can do.
Yeah, I think this is a nod to what people are already doing kind of within their own smaller ChatGPTs. They're building out, their helper, their model, right? Like I know someone who's got a lieutenant data, right? We've got someone on staff who's got Buttercup the unicorn, and he is her go-to for things, right? A friend recently sent me a ChatGPT model that had been built to respond as if Douglas Adams were sending the response back to you, right? So this idea of that customization, this is just making it more accessible, customizable, truly like a unique version of that engagement and interaction model that if you're already kind of doing on your own, but really cementing it. It's very cool.
Super cool. And the idea of these being either web connected or not, or having different plugins that they can rely on. And I think we're in for a world of creativity and advancement just from this one announcement alone. But what a week. What a great time to be alive, whether you're online or get to be here in Anaheim. It was just a fantastic week for our MOPS community and those of us that are passionate about some of the things that are advancing in AI. But all right, let's move on to our final segment. And so today, I couldn't fit my turntable and records into my suitcase. It's maybe a little bit much to ask, but there was a song that came out in the last week that almost gives me goosebumps to talk about it. And it's the last Beatles song, Now and Then, which with the assistance of AI, they were able to take a cassette that John Lennon had made and had a song that he had created. And for the longest time, it was very hard to use cassette technology to separate the voice from the piano.
Interesting.
So it was only recently that they were able to separate it and then be able to enhance it, clean it up, and then have Ringo and Paul and George contribute to a final Beatles song. And it is exceptional in many ways, but also I think a beautiful way of having AI give us something that we thought we had lost or would never have access to before. And so I know a lot of people are really nervous about what AI generated music is going to be in the future and all of those things, but I think this is such a beautiful story and just a beautiful song as well. So if you get a chance at the end of this episode of Launch Codes, we'll have a little segment for you to hear that track Now and Then. But I really encourage you to have a listen to it, and it is a really powerful thing to behold. And so, what are you pairing for us? Well, it should be the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but it's not. So what is our pairing this week, Andy?
I did that as a teaser for the last episode because it was just so top of mind at the moment. And right now I am circling back in a book that was written a number of years ago. I've read it several times. Each time I read it, I take something new away from it. So Tim Wu, fantastic author. It is nonfiction, and it is his book, The Master Switch. So it's the rise and fall of information empires. And it was written with sort of a view on the internet and what would come based on his exploration of other information empires. So it starts with electricity, telephony, then goes into radio, movies, and then television. And it looks at how the technology develops, how it becomes this very open source, anybody can play with it thing, and then it goes into a closed source system. And so this, against the lens of where we are right now with AI, for me, is really an interesting treatise on what we potentially might be looking at as far as open now then to close, or is that not going to follow that same paradigm in the same way that the internet has not?
Yeah. Well, we have a lot to learn from history, right? And we have to remember that we're while we're entering uncharted waters, there's a lot of lessons from the past that we should be acknowledging and thinking through.
So this is a fantastic book, and it has a great, the voice within it, Tim's voice is very present, and he is a wonderful storyteller. He weaves it together in a way where it almost feels as if you're reading fiction, in that sense of kind of having that narrative and through point that gives you that really truly dynamic story. Fantastic book. Everything I do is on Audible these days. It's gotta be. But this is one of my very first Audible books way back in the day. I've listened to it multiple times, introduced my husband to it. He loved it. I have bought copies of this book for people. It's a favorite. So definitely, I think right now it's top of mind for me to go back and read it again, because I think it's timely.
Well, I have some long flights to get through over the next little while, so I might download it and have a listen. But that's great. All right, well, that's it for this episode of Launch Codes. Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. You can find us on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. And stay connected with us on LinkedIn by joining our newsletter in the link in the description of the show. And as always, thanks, Mum, for watching. Thanks a lot, Andy.